Welcome to the Calm Analytics channel. This is Boris Diesenghausen with you. Today is May 18th, and we have a lot of very interesting and important news. In this episode, Putin voiced a new version of why the war began and what needs to happen for this war to end. As soon as tomorrow, Donald Trump has promised to call Putin in order to persuade him to cease fire, and Marco Rubio has revealed when truly tough sanctions against Russia might be imposed. Also, we'll talk about how the Kremlin is practically buying up European politicians wholesale, and most importantly, who is helping them do it. And also about how Robert Fico, following in Orban's footsteps, has initiated his own referendum to once again undermine Ukraine. All this and more in today's episode. If this is your first time on this channel, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. Let's get into it. So, once again, Putin is voicing a slightly modified version of what caused this war and how it should end. Here's a quote. "The result is the elimination of the causes that led to this crisis." Well, that's what they call the war. Creating conditions for a long-term sustainable peace, ensuring the security of the Russian state, ensuring the interests of our people, those people in those territories we always talk about. Always. Which territories are you talking about? Where people live who consider Russia their homeland. I think there's just a really simple solution here. Why torture yourself? Do you consider Russia your homeland? Do you not live in Russia? Suitcase. Train station, Russia. That's it, you're in your homeland. Why torment yourself? So why look at values that are foreign to you? That's all? Just go to your homeland. And by the way, what about those who, for example, considered Ichkeria their homeland? So why did you go to them? They also wanted to determine their own fate like that. Why did you go to them with war twice? Think about it. The first time you couldn't manage to break, compared to Russia, a really small territory, but with a very brave and proud people, you couldn't break them the first time. You had to come back a second time with war, wiping cities off the face of the earth, destroying entire villages. Why did you go there? And as for ensuring Russia's security, who was going to attack you? You bald old fool? Just think about it. Was anyone planning to attack Russia? We all know perfectly well who Russia attacked. Take, for example, Ichkeria, Georgia, the Ukraine. Who was planning to attack Russia, a nuclear state? By the way, this statement is a signal to everyone living in countries where there are fans of the Russian world. I want to emphasize specifically the fans of the Russian world who, for some reason, live in European countries but are waiting for Russian troops and love Putin. Although I think deep down maybe they're not really waiting for Russian troops because they wouldn't want their homeland to be recreated there in Europe. After all, they're used to living differently now, and they don't want to go back. It's truly a remarkable phenomenon. There are individuals who have lived for decades. In the Europe they claim to hate, receive European pensions, walk along clean, well-lit streets, and yet still wait for Russian troops, watch Solovyov, watch Skabiva. Is there any explanation for this at all? That is, he doesn't actually want to go back there. I have repeatedly seen footage of this cotton plague being expelled from Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. They weep, they cry. How could this be? I lived here. Why are you sending me back there? Back there. Go back and never show up in other countries again. Live there. Build your Russia there however you want. Even if you walk around with your bare backside, don't meddle in other countries. So, a new attempt. I've already lost count with Donald Trump. He announced a phone call with Putin. Tomorrow, Monday, May 19th, at 10 in the morning, US time, Donald Trump will have a conversation with Putin. We will discuss ending the bloodshed, which is causing an average of more than 5,000 Russian and Ukrainian soldiers to die every day. And that's what we'll discuss. And guess what? Well, of course, trade issues. How could it be otherwise? According to him, after the conversation with Putin, he will have a phone call with Volodymyr Zelensky, and then together with Zelensky, they will speak with representatives of NATO countries. I hope it will be a productive day. We will achieve a ceasefire, and this extremely brutal war, which should never have started, will finally end. God bless us, Trump added. And Putin's press secretary Peskov confirmed that a conversation between Putin and Trump is being prepared and is scheduled for May 19th. Well, trade. How could we do without trade here regarding the ceasefire? That night, let me remind you, the air raid alert here lasted for more than 8 hours. That night, Russia launched a record number of drones at Ukraine. Unfortunately, there are casualties and wounded. 273 Shaheds and their imitations were flying toward Ukraine. So there you have Putin's desire to cease fire. He's launching even more drones. In yesterday's episode, by the way, I mentioned that Trump's special envoy, Witkoff, the special envoy, cancelled his visit to Russia after Putin refused to discuss the ceasefire plan. Which, why am I bringing up this news again now? This plan was prepared jointly by the United States, Europe, and Ukraine. And right now, someone is trying to convince Trump, by the way, Witkoff is one of these someones, part of this collective, that only he, by personally meeting with Putin, can actually resolve anything. But isn't Witkoff acting on his behalf anyway? And what about State Department Secretary Marco Rubio? Then what's the point of all of them if only a personal meeting matters? Why does Witkoff keep flying to see Putin all the time? He even cancelled this visit last week. So why did I come back to this news? That Putin did not even consider the 22-point plan that the US, Europe, and Ukraine had prepared. Because besides Witkoff, the plan was also prepared by Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Keith Kellogg. So what's the point of all this if that scum that's entrenched there doesn't even want to discuss it? So do you know what Putin is hoping for? That, like a big spider, he'll wrap Trump up in his little web, pull the right strings, and that's it. And Trump will be in his hands. He'll get it back. Somehow, things got out of control here. So Trump suddenly started making some attempts at ultimatums, trying to lay down ultimatums. And here Putin thinks, I'll bring him back to that cozy, warm bath where I used to give him portraits. Forget it. Do you remember that cartoon about Kuzia, the house spirit? They gave him some kind of potion there. And so he forgot everything. This is pretty much the same kind of story. By the way, even their hairstyles are somewhat similar to Donald Trump's. Now, look at what happened. Putin was given an ultimatum, you remember, about the ceasefire. An absolutely clear, specific ultimatum. To deflect this ultimatum, Putin urgently proposes a meeting in Turkey. The place, the time, of course, he himself has no intention of flying there. He doesn't even send Lavrov. They send that pseudo-historian Medinsky and a downgraded delegation. He manages to deflect the ultimatum, so you know how it is. What ultimatum are you talking about? Now they're just going to talk about something else. No one even remembers that ultimatum anymore. Trump with a bunch of exclamation marks when Putin says, let's meet in Turkey. With a ton of exclamation marks, he writes, Ukraine must urgently accept, must be there, and so on. Ukraine agrees, showing for the 100th, the 1000th time, that Ukraine is actually striving for peace. The Russian delegation arrives, threatens, and puts forward absolutely unreasonable demands. We want all 4 regions and Crimea. Withdraw your troops from Zaporizhia, from Kherson, pull out of the regions. We want all of this for ourselves. They threaten. But what they really do is buy themselves time. In other words, by backing off from the ultimatum, they manage to buy themselves time. And naturally, how did the conversation end? It ended with the agreement that now each side would prepare a list of its demands for an unconditional ceasefire. But the problem is that no deadline was set for when the Russian side should present this list. And all of this is happening on the eve of that call. But tomorrow, Trump is supposed to call Putin and ask, how about you agree to a 30-day ceasefire? And then real negotiations will begin. But what could Putin say in response? What do you think? That our delegations have already decided to get in touch. We had a good talk in Turkey. Now we'll prepare the lists. In fact, it's Ukraine that doesn't want to cease fire and so on. That's the kind of nonsense he'll be spouting. And in the end, Trump will say the following. That this was the best conversation on Basta. Mawid, you see, I told you I have Nenekin excellent relations with Putin. Under Biden, there never would have been such a call, and this war wouldn't have happened if it weren't for Biden. So that's what we're going to hear. And also, let's get those rare earth metals over here, and on top of that, we'll make an absolutely amazing deal with Russia. We'll all be swimming in money. Well, maybe you won't, but I definitely will. Right? Isn't that how it's going to be? I think so. By the way, friends, don't forget to subscribe to this channel. If you're already subscribed, hit the bell icon. And Medinsky, the head of the Russian delegation, let me remind you, demanded that the international community recognize the annexation of these new regions. Where else is Ukraine supposed to withdraw its troops from? Unbelievable. But now let's talk about sanctions. As one economist I know said, my grandmother bluffs better than Medinsky. And all those lines of his like, we're ready to fight. Forever. We fought Sweden for 21 years. That's complete nonsense. It's a very poor bluff. And pseudo-historian Medinsky, yes, he says, we fought with Sweden, but everyone understands perfectly well that the war Medinsky is talking about, the northern war with the Swedes, was fought with a completely different level of intensity. Back then, you could be at war for 21 years, and you might spend years preparing for a single battle. Let me remind you, in the northern war that Medinsky was talking about, the Russians lost 30,000 killed. So the intensity of the fighting was, well, absolutely different. And in response to the question, so when will you actually impose sanctions, dear United States? Marco Rubio spoke out. And he said that in the end, the Senate will take action. When this final outcome will come is unclear. What did he mean by that? I mean, we asked to be given a little time to see if we could make any progress in the negotiations. But we have also been quite clear with the Russian side for several weeks. For almost 2 months now, we have repeatedly warned the Russians that sanctions will be imposed if no progress is made. 2 months, well, there's no deadline set here either. So how long can Putin keep manipulating things with his phone? But there is some news that, while it adds only a very, very small spark of optimism, it does add one. For the first time in a year, the US has sent a strategic drone to the Black Sea after what happened in Istanbul. The last time this RQ-4B Global Hawk was conducting surveillance and reconnaissance operations was almost a year ago, in June of last year. Well, I looked at this drone and it's the size of a real airplane. By the way, the Chinese have pretty much completely copied it. And there was some strange story involving this drone. The Russians claimed that it was this very drone that guided the ATACMS missiles to the beach in Crimea after it flew there and conducted reconnaissance. There were ATACMS strikes on Crimea. In reality, of course, it was the Russians with their idiotic Pantsir system, which they just placed right over the beach, trying to shoot down the missiles. Well, so they shot them down. And now the Russians are writing in their chats that the Americans are launching their reconnaissance drone again. They're going to strike Crimea again with ATACMS. So get ready. Those damned Americans want to ruin the holiday season. Remember this. There will be no more holiday season for you at all. Well, at least not the kind you used to have. As long as Crimea remains occupied. Look at the territories where Russia has reached, where it has set up these ambiguous, unrecognized territories. Take a good look at them. Some of those places used to be resorts. What's happening to them now? Well, you have the internet. You can check for yourself. By the way, friends, the war hasn't gone anywhere. And judging by the fact that Putin is preparing some kind of offensive there, he definitely doesn't plan to just back off in defeat. Let's be honest, he's already lost this war anyway. But that scoundrel still plans to continue the fighting. Unless, of course, someone in the White House wakes up and says, well, wait a minute, I think he's playing me. I don't think he wants to end the war, and he doesn't want me to go down in history as a great peacemaker. Well then, hit him with sanctions. Bring Senator Lindsey Graham here and impose those 500% tariffs you promised. Believe me, within a month, Putin's economy will get hacked a couple of times and collapse. Well, maybe it would take a few months. That's all there is to it. But the war hasn't gone anywhere. That's why I want to remind you that we have a major fundraiser for the unmanned aerial vehicle unit. That's the 252nd separate battalion. Really, really awesome, guys. There are all kinds of people there. As I've told you before, there are some who are 20-year-old sons. Some are fathers and some are grandfathers. Like the 58-year-old with the call sign zelensky. All in all, really awesome guys. Right now, they need a pickup truck. Unfortunately, they're left without wheels. A pickup with a proper, good electronic warfare system so that Russian FPV drones can't hit the vehicle. That's why it's important to go out, let it complete the mission, and get back so that everyone stays safe and sound, unharmed. We're raising funds for the pickup and the electronic warfare system. The donation link is in the description of this video. There you'll also find the fundraising card, the card number, and there's PayPal for those who want to help from abroad. This is, without exaggeration, a life-saving fundraiser. So I'm really asking for your help. From me, as always, you have my deepest, my greatest gratitude. If you're not on my channel, here's a QR code. You can use it to go straight to the donation page, and for that, I'm always extremely grateful to you. Well, from the good, the awesome, the bright warriors, we're moving on, unfortunately, to a nasty, a really nasty character. Slovak Prime Minister Robert Fico has stated that he will support a referendum to lift sanctions against Russia in his country if such a referendum is announced. Oh, how come? But who's going to announce it there? So, basically, what he said was, sanctions are like a plague. I reject the policy of sanctions. And at the beginning of May, representatives of the extra-parliamentary Slovak movement Revival submitted a petition to the president's office requesting a referendum on lifting sanctions against Russia. Let me remind you, Orbán is holding a referendum in Hungary on banning Ukraine from joining the European Union. And this one will be about rejecting sanctions against Russia. It's like coordinated teamwork between Fico and Orbán, Biba and Boba. It's a pity our partners don't work together as smoothly. Ukraine would have long since been provided, Scotta, with all the necessary weapons. Unfortunately, our enemies are much more united. They're bound together not just by money, but also by some shady, scheming interests with Putin. Fico and Orbán have a very simple task to say, it's not me who wants to lift the sanctions, it's my people who desire it, and in Hungary, Orbán will say, I don't want this either. Like the people said not to let Ukraine into the EU. If that's the case, you know what I suggest? Maybe Ukraine should hold a referendum on banning the transit of Russian energy resources through Ukrainian territory for 10 years. Maybe we should do that. And then what? That's what the people said. And believe me, I know exactly what the results of that referendum would be. I know for sure. Everyone would say the overwhelming majority. So how do you like that, Orban, huh? And that's a move further away from the Russian Federation. Somehow today we've got good news, mixed in with not so good news. The good news is the president of Armenia has signed a law, Britu, expressing the country's intention to join the European Union. Now that's what I call moving away from Russia. You know, everyone realized that being friends with the club of elderly CSTO members who will never actually protect you, they might attack you, but there's no protection. But it's hard not to remember that Mr. Pashinyan was a guest of Putin on May 9th, and sitting around him were those so-called heroes of the special military operation, so-called. How could you not remember that? But I want to congratulate the people of Armenia on making a civilized choice. You and many from Armenia support us, so thank you very much for that. And now, look at this news. This is just a gem. This news sums up all of Russia. You know, in Russia, there's this Orthodox oligarch, Konstantin Malofeev, a real piece of trash, an absolute scumbag, that one. So here's the thing. He's very close to those in power. Let me just add my 2 cents. Extremely close to Putin. And he's trying to get a court order to destroy the print run of a book published by Individuum. The book talks about his role in the collapse of a crypto exchange. And in this book, in Taram, the whole crypto story is laid out in detail in how Malofeev was stealing the cryptocurrency from Russians with the FSB helping him do it. Basically, they gained access to people's personal crypto wallets and appropriated over $300 million worth of other people's funds. Quite something, isn't it? So this so-called Orthodox oligarch turned out to be just an ordinary thief. But what about the commandment, thou shalt not steal? An Orthodox oligarch is stealing currency from Russians. Patriarch Kirill urges people to have more children and calls the war sacred. Shoigu is building an Orthodox church, but what a church it is. It's a khaki-colored pagan temple where the cult of war is present in every detail. Russians have put this religion to use for their own purposes. I don't know who has done more, Solovyov, with his calls to action or religion as a tool for luring people in, justifying and humanizing this war. Take this Malofeev, an Orthodox oligarch. On the one hand, he prays, and on the other, he finances killings, all in Donbas. So back in 2014, for his connections and for financing all those Strelkovs, Borodais, and other ghouls, he was sanctioned. And the Security Service of Ukraine has evidence that he was actively negotiating with Gherkin, who is now sitting in prison there. In general, of course, in Russia, it's like you rise, you fall, you explode, you go to prison, you go to war. It's complete madness. So he was the one financing all this rabble, including during the takeover and annexation of Crimea. This Malofeev, he's a Cossack. He also supports this rabble, the ones who call themselves Cossacks in Russia. By the way, what function do they even serve there? I constantly see them at all sorts of marches, carrying banners, flags, and ribbons. Usually these pot-bellied, thuggish-looking men with red faces, covered in medals like, I don't know, 100 years since the death of the Tsar Emperor. They just make up these awards for themselves. So what function do they actually serve there? This Malofeev is one of the main sources of funding for the separatists in Crimea and in the so-called DNR. He tried in the United States. By the way, why was he keeping his money there? Do you know? I don't know either, but about 5 million was frozen there. And I think it was transferred to Ukraine last year. Not much, but yes. And he intended, and to some extent succeeded, in secretly acquiring media companies in Europe and managing them in order to influence European political their processes. Moreover, this Malofeev recently married that Lvova Belova, who, together with Putin, had a warrant issued against her for the abduction of Ukrainian children. I'm just telling you this so you understand what modern Russia is like. I think those of you who actually live there probably know this even better than I do. And here's another interesting point. So, you know, if you dig a little deeper, and by the way, a very telling picture emerges. Deutsche Welle reports that a court in Hamburg has established that the deputy chair of the Alternative for Germany faction in the Bundestag maintained contacts with this Russian oligarch, Malofeev, who calls himself an Orthodox, though monarchist, and sees the Russian Federation as the successor to the Russian Empire, which, in his opinion, only the Russian President Putin can help revive. In my opinion, it would be hard to find a bigger shovel anywhere, even in military surplus stores, than the one Putin is using to bury Russia as it currently exists. I think it's simply impossible to get a bigger shovel. So, look, this Malofeev is financing protests in Germany by various activists and companies for traditional values and against everything else. And in April 2014, he facilitated a loan of 2 million euros from a company with Russian capital. To whom, do you think? Jean-Marie Le Pen, that's Marine, Le Pen's father. So basically, this bearded scoundrel got involved everywhere with his Russian money, trying to buy and bribe people everywhere. And some European officials shyly turn away, but still take the money. After all, they know exactly where it comes from and whose it is. And in 2019, he was banned from entering Bulgaria for 10 years because he was implicated in a money laundering case. And his case is connected to the chairman of the Bulgarian movement, Russophiles, who was detained as part of an investigation into espionage for the Russian special services. That is, and by the way, there are rumors that Dugin's daughter, the one who was blown up, it was actually supposed to be Malofeev himself who was going there. It's a very tangled story. Well, as for his IPA media holding, Malofeev's, it's called Tsargrad Media Holding. It suffered record losses this year, well, because it ended up under sanctions. The most interesting thing is that he doesn't just have a media holding. Tsargrad is actually a complete noob on Pete's cesspool. All of them hang out there. The Dugins, the Tkachevs, these are the most hardcore fans of the Russian world, fans of Putin, fans of Russia. They're all there on this Tsargrad. What's interesting is that he also owns another company, which also ran into losses. It's the Zarpripas brand products. Well, you know, like provisions, meaning some kind of food products. That is, there they have everything. King, 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 king. How do you even see yourselves? Medvedev, for example, sometimes associates himself with Nicholas II. Have you even looked at yourselves? Have you looked at your own policies? Where have you taken this richest Russia? You know, a country that could have been turned into a real garden, where everyone could have lived wonderfully with well-lit streets, roads, everything first class. Everyone would get medical care. There would be modern, luxurious hospitals, gas, electricity. Everything could have been provided. It was possible to do it. But no, you need your own peace. I don't even want to live well myself. I just want to make sure they don't live well. That's modern Russia for you. Well, friends, take care of yourselves. Take care of your loved ones. Subscribe to the channel and support the fundraiser, if you can. Wishing us all a peaceful day. And of course, glory to Ukraine.